Listen, keep learning. The Tom Daniel Show.
You're listening to The Tom Daniel Show, and I am your host, Tom Daniel. One particular song origin that's always intrigued me and tweaked my musical curiosity is Yankee Doodle. You know, apple pie, fireworks, 4th of July, right? It's a song that is so ingrained into what we think of America. But when you pay attention to the lyrics, some of it doesn't make much sense. Most people probably just hum along with the melody and the lyrics kind of fade into the background without much thought. I remember learning in elementary school that the British created the song to make fun of Americans, and somehow the Americans put a spin on it and co-opted the song as their own to throw right back in the faces of the British. But how did they pull that off? What was so insulting about the song? And what in the heck does a feather have to do with a macaroni? Now, we were all taught that those were just nonsense words, but as it turns out, macaroni is highly significant to the song's original intent of insulting Americans. Hey, there's nothing quite like some good old-fashioned historical shading, right? When I was in college, one of my favorite professors was a musical genius named Wayne T. Moore. And most everything I'm about to relate in this episode came from classes with him. He revealed to us a hidden history that most people wouldn't expect. Therefore, this podcast episode is dedicated to Dr. Moore. First of all, the tune we associate with Yankee Doodle was not composed to go along with the lyrics. Like so many parody songs throughout history, the mocking words of Yankee Doodle were added to an older existing melody, which is probably medieval in origin. They just borrowed the tune from somewhere else. The song in question is an old Irish folk tune called All the Way to Galway, and it has a melody in the second part that exactly matches the refrain of Yankee Doodle. Now, as you listen to this section, you could easily sing along with the words, Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle, dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. You can make it fit. Here it goes. Catchy tunes are always good at evolving and stretching across centuries, but it's like a musical game of telephone, where the tune gets slightly altered each time it's appropriated for something else. So, although the similarity is still there, you can also easily hear where the changes have happened. Okay, so now I've got a borrowed tune, but what about the word Yankee? How did Americans come to be called Yankees? Although the exact origin of the word Yankee is still in dispute, I think the most likely theory is that it comes from the Dutch word jankie, which was used as a slur for someone who whines a lot. It's essentially a crybaby, a wimp. It's not exactly a term of endearment and is more of a way to belittle someone, actually. Now, there is a 15th century Middle Dutch harvest song from Holland containing a lot of gibberish words that are kind of similar to what you'd hear in Yankee Doodle. Here's one example, as follows. Yanker diddle doodle down, diddle doodle lanther, Yankee viver vover voun, butter milk und tanter. Now, if you recite those Dutch gibberish lyrics to the tune of Yankee Doodle, they fit perfectly. It doesn't really matter how you pronounce the words, thank goodness, as long as the rhythm is correct. So even in its earliest form, these words were intended as nonsensical and intentionally silly and teasing. Now, by the way, I hate having to take the internet's word for something without being able to track it down and back it up. There must be 1,000 websites that refer to this elusive 15th century Middle Dutch harvest song without one single site identifying the actual song. I need the title so I can find the music somewhere and hear it for myself, but so far that hasn't happened. Maybe a listener to this podcast could solve this mystery and leave it in the comments. I'd be much obliged. So we've got a borrowed tune with an insulting title and nonsense lyrics. But now what about that macaroni thing? See, here's the first verse of the song that we were all taught in school. Yankee Doodle came to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. All right, what's up with that? Well, as it turns out, it was common for well-born English boys that were coming of age to travel throughout Europe on something called the Grand Tour as a rite of passage, and as a way to experience the world while also showing off their wealth. And one of the obligatory stops on this tour was Italy, where they learned to love pasta. Now, initially, macaroni became a term referencing someone's elite status because only the rich could afford to travel and eat pasta. Therefore, it became somewhat of an inside joke to refer to an elite boy as a macaroni. Which means for someone to stick a feather in his cap and call it macaroni is to suggest that someone of very low breeding was trying to convince people that he was otherwise. In other words, he wasn't sophisticated enough to be an actual macaroni, but wanted people to think he was. Sort of like a hick. But then the word macaroni took an evolutionary swerve. I guess there's really no way to say this delicately. I apologize, but macaroni became a homosexual slur. The macaronis were typically young gay men of the time who dressed ridiculously. Gigantic powdered wigs, flashy clothes, overdone makeup, and they behaved extremely effeminately. A more contemporary description would be to say that they were flaming. This means that the use of the word macaroni in Yankee Doodle is kind of a double zinger. It's an insult on top of an insult. They were mocking American attempts to appear sophisticated while simultaneously accusing them of pretending to be so stylish as to be effeminate. Another homosexual slur common at the time was dandy. A dandy was not as flamingly ridiculous as a macaroni, but was just, I guess, a basic garden variety homosexual. Now, go back and consider that line one more time. Stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Is it starting to make more sense now? So, to recap just a little bit, the words to Yankee Doodle, which was a song that the British sang about Americans, contained a Dutch slur for a crybaby and two English slurs for hicks and homosexuals. Are you starting to get the picture? You're listening to The Tom Daniels Show. We'll be right back.
What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show.
Welcome back to The Tom Daniels Show, and once again, give it up for my band. Mary Mac is the world's most perfect band. And we were talking about how the British initially used the song Yankee Doodle to tease American, let's just say American masculinity, and accuse American men of being effeminate. It really makes you reconsider the whole song. But who was the mastermind behind these pretty insulting lyrics, and why go to all that trouble to mock the Americans in the first place? Well, the actual song Yankee Doodle is attributed to British Army surgeon Richard Shuckburgh and was composed at Fort Craylow on the Hudson River in New York in 1755. At that time, the British were fighting the 7 Years' War against France, and one of the theaters of that war was called the French and Indian War, which pitted the British colonies against the French colonies in North America. The French and their Indian allies were on one side, and the British and Americans were on the other. Now understand, during this conflict, Americans were fighting alongside the British as dutiful and loyal colonists of the British Empire. We were supposed to be friends, united against a common enemy. But the song Yankee Doodle perfectly captures the actual contempt and disdain that the British felt towards the American colonists as a whole. They were poking fun at Americans as being cowardly pansies while trying to act stylishly better than their true station in life. And the British weren't being secret about it either. They openly mocked and ridiculed Americans at every opportunity, and Yankee Doodle was like a hand grenade. They used it when they wanted maximum destruction. Plus, in the original Shuckburgh lyrics, the sheet music instructs that the words should be sung through the nose and with a country drawl. Now here's one of those original Shuckburgh verses. With his commission he had got, he proved an arrant coward. He dared not go to Cape Breton for fear he'd be devoured. In this verse, the he being referenced is someone named Brother Ephraim in the song, who sold his cow and bought an officer's commission with the money. You see, that's how little the British thought of the American officer corps among the troops. In most of Shuckburgh's verses, he threw around a lot of agricultural-sounding names to, again, poke fun at the country bumpkin perception of Americans. So not only were the words mocking enough, but they were supposed to be sung in a voice that exaggerated a stereotypical, unsophisticated American accent. Jeering and taunting someone's name, economic status, lack of sophistication, and accent. Of course, those of us who live in the South wouldn't know anything about that now, would we? Here's another Shuckburgh verse loaded with American-sounding names and unsophistication. Dolly Bushel let a fart. Jenny Jones, she found it. Ambrose carried it to mill where Dr. Warren ground it. This is not a nice song to be singing about your friends. It's definitely not highbrow humor, but it underscores the level of disrespect the British felt towards the colonists. Plus, I'm pretty sure this level of contempt from the British wasn't limited to just American colonists, but was also heaped upon their colonies in the Caribbean, Africa, India, Asia, etc. The British got a huge kick out of singing that song for 20 years, and the Americans had no choice but to just stand there and take it. And then something strange happened, called Lexington and Concord. Tensions were high, and the American colonists were getting fired up. That's when an American Minuteman named Edward Bangs rewrote the song's verses in 1775 while keeping the refrain intact, and it circulated widely in a Boston newspaper. It's perfectly okay if you feel like humming Twisted Sister's "We're Not Gonna Take It" right about now. Edward Banks's verses had 15 new verses with the original refrain in between each one. See, he kept the original tune, which was smart because everyone already knew it, but he completely flipped the script on the song's intended message. Banks's version spread among the colonies like wildfire, and the lyrics were all about American strength, unity, defiance, and contempt for British rule. This was now a song about American pride and resistance. Here are a couple of Banks's verses. Father and I went down to camp along with Captain Gooding. There we saw 1,000 men as thick as hasty pudding. You remember that one? Yeah, I remember that one from school. Simple, straightforward, a clear depiction of the growing unity and sheer numbers of the American forces. No more of the bumbling Brother Ephraim or Dolly Bushel. And then there's this verse. And there was General Washington, Gentle folks have bowed him. They say he's grown so 'ternal proud he wouldn't ride without them. Wow. Strength, dignity, and fierce loyalty that was reciprocal between George Washington and his men, which was a far cry from the crybaby Americans in the British version. No more cowardly bumpkins. The Americans took something that was supposed to mock them, and they turned it into a new cultural identity of courage and independence. It's like they were saying, you better believe we're not like you. We don't want to be. We're Americans. So, after having the song thrown at them in every mocking opportunity by the British for 20 years, the Americans lustily sang the new verses right back at the British, this time full of masculinity and defiance. And the legend was born. I can't even imagine how many times the colonists would have had to have heard those mocking, demoralizing British lyrics, all the way to the point of being so desensitized to them that they could turn it back around. And the British, they must have been dumbstruck that the very song they'd used to ridicule and belittle the Americans had been adopted as a rallying cry by those same colonists who'd suddenly grown a backbone. It's kind of brilliant if you think about it. I guess you could say this was an 18th century version of, "Hey, Limey, how you like me now?" They took a symbol of oppression and turned it into a weapon. It was a declaration of independence in musical form. Thank you, everybody. This has been the Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning.
Keep listening. Keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Keep listening. Keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. Take a break from your usual routine and tune in to the Tom Daniels Show. You'll discover the world of melodies and stories that you might not know. Keep listening, keep learning. The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting for? The Tom Daniels Show. What are you waiting